Well, guys, we finally got rain, so let's go see how the garden looks now. In typical Hickorycroft fashion, our garden is full of weeds. We grow weeds really, really well, and we're so lucky that some of those weeds are actually edible and useful. But we're going to show you a little bit of what's going on in the garden this week. So last night, we finally got some rain. About 1.25 inches actually. A lot of rain, but it came down hard and fast. And hopefully some of it soaked in, but it's saving us having to water today. And watering has been so ongoing in the last little while because it has been dry. But we've managed to keep most of these plants alive. So let's go take a look. Here you see our 2 rows of snap peas. Most of these have gone rubbery or whatever you want to call that on the side. They're no longer edible for the pods. So we are leaving them on to be dried peas. And we've got a couple special ones that we've knocked down to save for seed. All in all, disappointed with them this year. It was a bad spring for them. We did not get a lot to put into the freezer, so we're going to be figuring out uses for dried peas, that's for sure, because we're going to have a lot of those. Next to them, potatoes, doing amazing. They needed this water though, so that's great. And as you can see over here, our garlic is ready to come out. We are not tackling that this weekend. That is going to be next weekend's job. But we're not leaving it as long as we did last year because you started to see the skins peel off. So this is getting pulled out in a week. So hold us to that. Tomatoes are doing really, really well this year. Here we have some Scotia tomatoes. Only 4. I've got some more late planted ones with our lawn keepers that hopefully will give us some tomatoes later in the season. But these have got blossoms and fruit is starting to set, which is awesome. One thing that we were actually kind of complaining about because it was so slow to get started and we almost contemplated getting rid of them completely was the eggplants. But no blossoms yet, but the plants are coming along really, really well, which is really good because we do like eggplant, especially pickled eggplant. So stay tuned to see how these develop. Last year we were not great with the eggplants. We only got a couple off of the plants. They were just so slow. We contemplated not bothering and we gave it another go. So we'll see how this goes. But next to the eggplants, I do have to say this one is a big disappointment for me. I have been determined to grow cabbage. I love cabbage and I wanted cabbage that maybe wouldn't get bothered by the bugs. So we decided to try purple cabbage. Now this is a Savoy cabbage, which maybe was our mistake rather than doing a real head cabbage. But as you can see, they're all just going to seed. We've not gotten a single head out of any of these. We've got some that try and the next thing you know, that seed head pops up. So we are going to get these out of here. We're going to harvest some of the leaves for ourselves, give that a try, but mostly it's going to be rabbit food. Nothing is wasted, but it just didn't work for creating what we wanted. So, like I said, we're just going to be pulling these out and feeding them. As you can see, there's still a little bit of bug damage on these, but not nearly what we were seeing on the green or bluey green colored cabbage that we had. So purple still might be the way to go, but definitely not as a Savoy. We were going to try doing a head cabbage of purple this fall and see if those do any better. Just trying one of the leaves just to see if it's even worth us harvesting any for ourselves. I'm going to say it, I don't think so. It's very, very bitter. It doesn't taste anything like cabbage. Saying that, I don't know how many times I've really tried the leaves of cabbage to know if it's supposed to taste like cabbage, but it's got a horrible bitter taste. So I'm thinking it's going to be animal food, but definitely not wasted. And learning curves for us because all mistakes are just, or what is it? What's your shirt say? All mistakes are just happy accidents? No mistakes, just happy accidents. I'll get it eventually. Here we have our Violet Queen potatoes. This was a new type for us. We only had 4 pounds of seed potatoes that we purchased, but they were another all purple that we really wanted to give a shot. So they're doing quite well. They actually started to die back and I did start watering them, which I don't love to do with potatoes because one of the things I think that is great about potatoes is they just kind of are a put them in and leave them. But this year was so dry, these plants were dying back before I felt they had adequate time to really, really create any good potatoes underneath. So this rain will be a lifesaver on those. Here we have our pineapple tomatoes. As you know from previous reports and tours, we did not grow too many of these this year because we didn't need very much yellow juice because we didn't drink very much. So we only planted 6 of these tomatoes and they are doing fantastic. I don't believe there's any fruit set yet, but lots of blossoms and the plants themselves are looking healthy because we have stayed on top of watering these. Saying a plant looks healthy. Well, You can't quite say the same thing about my cucumbers. The two plants that managed to survive do look pretty good. A little bit of cucumber beetles on them, which were biting at them a little bit. Realizing now this was not the greatest spot. These were originally 9 cucumbers, which got dug up multiple times by raccoons and skunks and everything else, and still struggle to survive. But I don't think we're going to get enough for pickles this year, and we're just going to kind of hope for some eating ones and some for seed. Yes, there really are plants in here. Hard to believe amongst all these weeds. Some of them are weeds that we say, oh, well, we won't pull them out because we can eat them, so we'll harvest them. But I think it's time to just be ruthless and get these out of here. These are our totally sweet Italian frying peppers. They actually are doing quite well. I need to get some cages on these before they get a whole lot bigger. Maybe that'll be a project for this weekend. I think we have 35 or 36 planted here, and I do have more to plant. I don't know if we're getting too late. But as you can see, we do have fruit set on these, and that is fantastic. Even though they're small, they are still doing well. This year, one of the things we decided was not to grow any type of diversity of peppers. Outside, all we have is the totally sweet Italian frying peppers, which saves us any cross-pollination for seed-saving purposes. But in our porch, which I will maybe show you at the end of this video, we have our Aurora hot peppers, and they are doing fantastic in pots in the house so that we don't get any cross-pollination.
So now we move to another garden area. This is the area that we started gardening, well, really expanded, I guess, in 2022. We had a little bit of stuff in here sort of the year before that, but you can see it's not looking too bad. We've been kind of staying on top of the weeds in this area for the most part. So area 1, as we come into the garden, we've obviously got some smaller stuff here that takes a bit of tending. So we've got lettuce and onions and celery, and then we have rutabagas, which they're looking a little sad, but they're not doing terrible. So the onions in this garden are actually doing fairly well, although I don't know if they're doing quite as well as in another area that I'm going to show you later. But what we've done for the onions is we dig a little trench, and that allows us to water down those trenches and really concentrate the watering efforts. And we've actually started doing that with other stuff, such as the celery that you can see in the row behind. Now, when I'm down at ground level like this, it does look like there's a lot of weeds. But one thing we've been using a lot this year is this stirrup hoe. I actually bought a second one. It's a little wet to demonstrate right now, but these have been amazing for keeping the paths clean. So behind me is another little bit of an experiment. So we tried these in 2022, and we're doing them again this year to give them a fair chance, because we got them planted really late last year. They grew fairly decently, but they didn't really produce. And these are lima beans. I forget the variety, but unfortunately we purchased new seeds for 2023. And unfortunately, a lot of them didn't germinate. So I kind of scroll down here, you'll see the trellis is pretty bare. Now, one thing we are definitely finding with this is they were advertised as more of a bush type, but we're definitely finding they're a pole type. So we'll come back to these because it will really depend whether these stay as to how well they do. I.e., if we can get a good amount of seed from them to replant next year, they'll probably stay. If we can't, they'll probably go. And that's really how we're treating everything this year. As I kind of pan over this little patch, things that do well are going to be staying, and things that don't do well are going to be going. And one thing that does really well for us is lettuce. And lettuce is going to become a much bigger focus in the near future, I think, here on our homestead. It's been a good lettuce year, though, I have to admit. So a bit of an unfair thing compared to some plants, because there are a few things that, because we've had sort of a very wet, cool spring in a lot of instances, maybe aren't doing as well, but it's been really good for lettuce. We're definitely trying some new varieties, and one of the nice things about lettuce is it's very easy to try new varieties because their separation distance isn't very great. So you can have a lot of diversity. So one thing with the lettuce I just showed you is we're into July, obviously. It is getting hotter, and we've had a really dry spell, but we've planted this lettuce that looks amazing in an area that it still gets morning sun, but it does get shaded for something that I'm going to show you in a moment. It basically is shaded by this Manitoba maple tree. And I think that's a big key here for this stuff doing so well, is it's not blasted by the sun all day. And the other thing about it is, back over in that little corner there, We have a 300-gallon tub with goldfish in it, of course, that we use for watering the plants. So this has been a bit of a lifesaver. I think water collection period has been a lifesaver for us. Unfortunately, just because we haven't finished the two buildings you can see on either side here, we're not getting the full advantage of our rainwater collection here. So we do fill this up and sort of as it draws down as we water. But the nice part of it is, this is where the tub sits. And as I pan around fairly quickly here, there's the garden we were just looking at, or the garden area. So the water collection is really close to the vegetables that need the water the most. And we've kind of radiated out from there for the most part as we go out into this garden. So I'll start showing you some of the other things that we have going on here. This little plant is something I'm kind of interested to see how it does. That's a black sesame plant. And there's a few more in this row. Now, we've never grown sesame before. Obviously, sesame is one of those things that you can certainly understand how it fits into a human diet. But it's supposed to do fairly well. So we shall see. Stay tuned for more updates on these little sesame plants. Behind the black sesame, we have Kajari melons. These kind of got off to a little bit of a rough start. We kind of had them in pots. We typically start them in pots. We had them in pots a little longer than we probably would have liked. And then when we planted them out, it's been fairly dry. So again, you can see the little depression. We've created the trough to help with the watering. But I'm really hoping after this rain we got last night, these kind of start springing into action a bit. But on this trellis, and planted at the same time, both planted out and started from seed, we have sugar baby watermelons. So this is something that we've always enjoyed growing, and it's the only watermelon we've ever had luck with in our climate. We've actually gotten to eat some watermelon. And these little guys seem to be doing really well. I know there's not a lot of growth on there at the moment, but I've been amazed. These are from saved seeds that we collected the last time we were successful at growing it. And so far, so good. So we will see what happens later in the year with these sugar baby watermelons. And of course, as a mainstay staple, we have San Marzano tomatoes. We have 3 trellises, as I scan up here, of these planted. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them at the moment, but they are doing well, full of flowers, and we should have a very bountiful San Marzano tomato crop, because these plants are doing awesome. One thing we actually did a little differently this year with these San Marzanos is we spaced them out more. And I know right now they're looking pretty lush, they're looking pretty full, but we spaced these out on the trellises a lot better than we normally do. Obviously, this is going to sound like super common knowledge, etc. We did some experimenting with sort of spacing things out more. Last year with some tomatoes, did really well because the tomatoes that were more spaced out on the trellises just did better. We pretty much got the same amount of fruit as we did from trellises where we'd crowded them. And I'll be quite frank, the only reason we crowded our tomatoes was because we always start a bit more than what we want, because they don't all come up. They come up pretty good, but you don't get 100% germination. But in some cases, we have had close to 100% germination, and we always feel bad for not planting some of those plants. It's kind of like that potential of like, well, we have it, we better get it in. But we're usually constrained a little bit for space. And this year we actually did discard a few because they weren't the best specimens at the time of planting. And we'll see, because I think it's going to be better for us in the long run. And as I say, it's a pretty basic garden principle that the more space, care, and attention a plant gets, like anything living, the better it's going to do. So I think that's kind of that story. Of course, what subsistence garden is complete without potatoes? Well, probably none. But we have several varieties of potatoes. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail about them today's video, but we have several varieties, and they're all in rows, and they've always done pretty well in this garden. See over here, we've got them sort of separated by variety just to kind of keep track of them. And they're looking pretty good despite the fact that we've basically, from a garden perspective, had a bit of a drought this June and early July. And then we come to everybody's favorite plant, the squash. This is Canada crookneck squash, and we tried something that we have done with some success in the past, of basically planting it into a partially, I know that the outside doesn't look like it is, but the inside is fairly composted down. This is a compost pile of all the manure and bedding from the barn over the winter. So the one thing about this setup is It works really well if you're getting kind of that consistent rain. And when we tried it in the past, that's what we had. So the compost pile that they were planted in did really well. It stayed moist. It's got lots of nutrients in it. They did really well. But this year, we've had some dry conditions. Although we started off really well, like I said about the lettuce. Early on, amazing. We had lots of rain. It was great for those early season crops. But that was before we could get these squash planted out. So these have been struggling a little bit. Now, as I scanned around there, you'll probably see some of them were a bit yellow. Some of them were looking quite well. I think that's just luck of the draw of where the seed was put in the hill. We're going to see what happens with this, but we think next year we're going to try a completely different method, which I won't talk about right now, but stay tuned, because if this doesn't work out super well, I think we're going to be pretty much forced to change to what we're thinking. And I'll give you a hint. It's very similar to how we grew the watermelons. Something we're doing in a little bit smaller volume this year. This is sort of part of our, I'm going to call it grain crops. And this is our Mennonite sorghum. Now, it's actually not looking too bad at the moment, as I pan up here, but it's a little bit behind, and we had really poor germination. We germinated these in seed trays. Now, behind them, or off to the side, you can see there's some mammoth black sunflowers. We did the same thing, germinated them ahead of time. Really toying with the idea of changing it up a little bit on the sunflowers, because we find planting them out from the seed trays, they seem to always be a little bit stunted or slow to grow. So this may be the last year we do that, but we will see how this row does. We have a bit of a love-hate relationship with corn. This is actually a blue popcorn that we've planted. It's an experiment to just sort of see, because we've had a lot of failures with sweet corn, not all related to raccoons, but that's another story. But of course, corn is a tough one for us where we live, because even if it does really well, we're dependent on getting the seed stock, because all around us is the more conventional corn, which is, of course, GMO. And that limits our ability to save seeds. So even if this corn does really well, every year we revisit this and kind of question, why are we growing corn? But the next grain crop that I'm going to come and show you, we're really excited about, because this is sort of the first year doing this seriously, and we're going to see how we do. As I look down at my feet to make sure I'm not stepping on anything walking through the garden. This really lush looking rows of plants is millet. So this is Devil's Canyon millet, which this is our first year growing it. We are doing some experimenting on the growing method, and basically we just grew it in seed trays, and then once we got to the time of planting, we sort of broke up those seed trays. So you can see when I come in really close, there's kind of little clusters of plants. And this stuff so far has been amazing, because we planted it out. Millet obviously doesn't really love cold weather, so we planted it out a little bit later, and it was quite dry. And right from transplanting out, this stuff just started to grow with basically no care. I mean, we watered it maybe twice, like obviously the day we planted it, I think one other time, and this stuff has just grown amazingly compared to the Mennonite sorghum. And we have a second kind that was actually a free bonus gift from the seed company that we purchased these. This is Dragon's Claw millet, which I would say is not growing quite as monstrously as the Devil's Canyon millet, but it's still doing quite well, and I'm very curious to see how the harvest goes on this later on this year. So before I leave this garden area, we've got quite a variety in here. We've got some sort of what you would consider staple main things, like the potatoes that we've got going, the squash, and the Roma tomatoes. We've got some smaller, I'm going to say more delicate, not really delicate, but just some crops like the onions, the celery, and the lettuce and stuff that we're tending a bit more. And I think this little setup we have where it's very close to the water source has been saving grace for us actually getting anything off of these so far, or having them survive even, period. But then we have the grains and the millets, and we always talk about this a little bit. We keep experimenting with that stuff because it would be nice, both from a human perspective and a livestock perspective. We will come back to some discussions on the livestock side of things, because there's been some changes for those of you who may have been watching, but to try to grow some of this stuff. So we've actually talked a little bit about the sorghum. We're big fans of it, but we've never had it do stellar amazing. And so this year we're kind of giving it a last go because, like I said, we had really poor germination, and it didn't matter whether it was seeds that we'd purchased or seeds that we'd saved. We just had poor germination. It's kind of that question of maybe our climatic conditions now are not ideal for growing that kind. So stay tuned there, because if it doesn't kind of do well, for lack of a better way to put it, that may be something that comes off the list. We might be kind of jumping the gun there, but on the flip side, from a grain perspective, so far the millet's looking really promising. Obviously you can't produce the syrups and things from them, but still, you've got to choose your battles wisely. So that was kind of a view of some annual gardening that we've got going on in this area, but I'm going to take you over to an area that's got some perennial stuff in it that we've started, and just sort of show you where things are at there. So where they're at is they need to be weeded, for lack of a better way to put it.
We had the best of intentions.
And we did, and you can see we've mowed some of the pathways in between here. We've done this in a row style, but if you go back to our video on planting our food thicket, we've alternated what's in here. So I'll take you through and show you a few things and just kind of where they're at. The three things that are doing amazing in here are elderberries. We've got, I forget exactly, but we've got quite a few black elderberry cuttings planted in here, and like this one here on the end of the row, most of them are doing amazing. We expect some losses, to be honest, but black elderberry has done awesome. Catnip. I think this big plant kind of speaks for itself. Yes, true. Catnip has other uses, so we're going to actually get the chance to harvest some of this for cats and for humans. And our black currants, we actually got a little bit, Stephanie's weeding the row, we did get a little bit of a harvest, very small, but the plants have done really well, except for one that was for some reason dug up repeatedly by raccoons. We really dislike raccoons. But those that didn't get dug up are doing really well. Have some other things like chocolate mint, which we actually were able to find again, doing amazing, of course, as mint does. We have several Hasscaps, which we actually got the chance this year to taste a few. They were very small, but we still got to taste the flavor, and we really liked it. So this is something that if we can, throughout this year and next, if we can upsize our patch of Hasscaps, we are definitely going to do so if we get that opportunity.
And our asparagus, it's alive in all this grass.
It's doing pretty well. So one thing, we did mulch this fairly early on with some compost out of the pile from the barn. It was fairly well rotted down, but we do need to come back and do some tending here, because the plan is to mulch the plants with some good wood mulch, and potentially eventually mulch the paths as well, just to kind of keep things manageable. Then we have this part of this food thicket that we actually planted last year. You can see that catnip is huge right next to a pear, and we've got some elderberries flowering, doing amazing. The growth on these elderberry clones is phenomenal when they're happy and they get a good start. But and then obviously more catnip down there, and that whole row is doing amazing. So we've got some pretty high hopes going forward for this area, and we're definitely going to expand. We don't have everything planted. These 4 black currant bushes haven't been planted out yet, so hopefully that's a job that we will get done this weekend, but we'll see. We basically ran out of time and have just been kind of maintaining them, and they're not looking fantastic, but I think once we get them planted they'll be fine. And look at this comfrey. So this comfrey I actually got from my friend Miles, I think it was almost 3 years ago, and we planted it in the food forest, which we've kind of abandoned as a viable food option at the moment, because just the soils down there are not stellar amazing. So I transplanted this up here, and these plants were stunted little plants that weren't doing anything, and I can see they're doing amazing. Like, they're doing way better, and this actual individual one I believe got cut down by accident, and it's still grown back up, so pretty happy about that too. And again, spoiler alert, I think this is something going forward we're really going to focus on a lot, is these perennial type plants. We've got some plans, we've got some goals we'd like to meet. Out. There's really not too much more that we would grow more of. I mean, we're going to up our lettuce production, for example, a little bit, but you can only up it so much before you just have more than you can deal with, more than you can use. And then you kind of question, why are you, it's a lot of time and effort, for lack of a better way to put it. So we are going to switch medicinal plants, because that's a really important piece of the puzzle that we've probably been lacking in up until recently.
Well, we're beside the barn in the jungle garden here. We're not going to focus too much on this because there's really not a lot in here. We only have a few crops. What you're going to see on these trellises here are my Palestinian tomatoes. The plants themselves aren't looking great, but they're loaded with fruit, and the fruit is actually a decent size already. If we look right here, let's see if I can get it. Not too shabby, it's getting there. And there's quite a few of them as we look along here. So promising, we should have some tomatoes from these relatively soon. Our yellow crookneck summer squash is really fighting to make a recovery from those squash bugs and cucumber beetles. I have been squishing, and look, we finally have flowers starting, but you can see cucumber beetles are all over those still. So, squish! So hopefully we get some squash from these this year. I know we'll get some, but we might not get enough. So luckily we still have some in the freezer from previous years. Our Yukon Gold Hills are doing pretty good. They were struggling without the water as well, but that rain last night I think is really going to help. Look at the health and beauty of this squash plant here. And there's tons of blossoms deep down in there that are certainly going to be producing something for us. And right here we have the row of Chris's mung beans. They are certainly coming along, and I think this wet will really help them. They've got some blossoms trying. We're not really sure too much on these as to how they grow and whatnot. This is our first year, so certainly an experiment, and we're going to learn from this and decide if this trellising system is good enough or whether we need more. One thing that maybe did not fare as well last night in the rain is the wheat, the red fife wheat. Definitely took a beating and has flopped over. We're going to have to get this kind of tied up. This would be an ongoing concern for some crops out in the big fields and that, and you see farmers, and this is what is leading to things like the spraying of them so that they ripen off quick and early and evenly. Is when you're dealing with a large harvest and a big crop in a big field, you're not going out and manually trying to put all this back up. You're just losing it, basically. So from a small scale, this is not detrimental, but from a large scale, it could be. And that's one of the things where we are really trying to figure out ways to grow our own wheat so that we don't have to worry about whether our wheat has been sprayed before we eat it. Otherwise, in here, we have our all blue potatoes. This was our largest group of potatoes that we planted. It was I believe it was about 18 pounds of seed potatoes, which should produce us a lot. But really, that's it for this garden. We are going to take you on a little quick tour of the raised beds because I know this video is starting to get a little bit long. But we really wanted to touch on all the garden space in this tour because we have never actually taken you through everything. And this is basically about 1/10 of an acre in total of footage of all three or four gardens combined, if you call the raised beds a separate garden. So we're going to go over to the raised beds, but I'm only going to touch on the highlights because I don't want to lose you guys as we keep going here. Beans. Our beans, I think, are the topic of discussion in this garden because they are doing amazing. These ones are climbing. They're almost to the top of our cattle panel arch trellis here, and they're not even the best ones in the batch. Look at these. These are our yellow pole beans. And they are just about to touching on the top. No beans quite yet. Oh, I lied. Look at this. Look at this. Look at this. They're coming. First beans discovered. Not ready to harvest yet, but that's awesome. Super exciting. The blue barrels. We've talked about this on a previous video here talking about why we love the blue barrels. As you can see, even with the drought that we've been having, or semi-drought, still lush, still full of greenery and growing like mad. This is the best carrots we've ever had. The beets are really pumping it out. So are the herbs. I said this year I didn't need to grow very much parsley, and look at it in that second tall blue bucket there. It's growing like mad. So I guess we're going to have lots of parsley again, but that's okay. Over on this side, this was our turnip seed bed. onions to go to seed, and also our Detroit red beets to go to seed. And as you can see, we've pulled some out. We actually did a video on that, which is coming soon, because as many of you know, we like to seed collect, and boy, did we get a lot of seeds off those turnips. So stay tuned to watch that one to see just how prolific they can be and what you can do with those seeds. Otherwise, we have some black-seeded Simpson lettuce in here. As you can see, it is flowering, and we probably have way more than we need, but that's our textbook move. Can never have too much seed. And next things that will be going to seed for collection is our dwarf curled Scotch kale. This was our first year actually getting this to go to seed and not crossing with other things. So we have seed here. And as you can see in that bed over there, again, a whole lot of seed growing for collection. So that is wonderful, and certainly going to be useful come winter seasons for sprouting and things like that. It's always nice when you can grow your own sprout seeds instead of having to purchase them. We do still have a lot in these raised bed that requires some TLC. As you can see, we have a complete weed bed here that we're actually going to pull this out. It has a nice trellis in, and we're going to plant some peas for fall garden. Fall garden is something that we really have to focus well on this year, because some things didn't do as well as we'd hoped in our summer garden, so we need to make up for that. Here we have our gray sweet cherry tomatoes. Look at that. We've got some nice green tomatoes coming. So not too long and we'll be able to start harvesting these, and then they will become a menace, as they always do. This is why we only plant 3, because 3 is way more than you would need. Now, I know we have not actually put the video up yet about our turnip seeds, but one thing we did do is mulch all of the shell casings, I guess you would call them, from the seed pods. Pod casings, there you go. And this was only a few days ago. And look at, and over here, turnips. This is how we're doing our fall crop this year, and I have a feeling we're going to need to thin this out, because there's a lot of volunteers that are going to come up out of these seeds. What happens is when we put these when we break the pods open, sometimes some seeds stick in the pods, and when we lay them down as mulch, well, the seeds grow. So this is the easiest way for us to plant our fall turnips. And the last thing I'm going to talk about over here is something that really looks like a weed bed. It actually kind of is a weed bed. This has stinging nettles, lamb's quarters, wood sorrel, wild parsnips in here, and Chris's mulberry trees. So the mulberry trees didn't do so great through the drought, and we lost quite a few, but there's a few that are really thriving in here amongst all these weeds. The weeds are providing them shade, I think, which helps, and we have been watering them quite intensely. But an experiment that we are doing is, rather than going out and harvesting those wild parsnips out of the yard where the ground is hard, I'm going to harvest them right out of these raised beds. And if I take one here, give me a second to put on a glove, because you shouldn't harvest wild parsnips or things like that without a glove. I find one here. I'm just going to pull, it's not ready yet, but I'm going to pull one out just to show you. Look at that. We discovered if we actually grow them on purpose, they grow beautiful. So maybe in another 2-3 weeks, we're going to start pulling these out, wash them up and chop them, and they're going to go in the freezer. So guys, that's our tour. It's been a busy gardening season. Things have got away from us. We're making up for it now. This bit of rain is going to make all these weeds grow like mad, of course, as it always does. But we're definitely pulling out some things, getting ready for fall season. I know it's so horrible to say that, because nobody wants to think about fall or winter yet. But coming up, we've got the Every Bit Counts Challenge in August, and we're really hoping that we're going to have a lot of stuff ready here to harvest. Usually the beginning of August is a little slower. We're focusing on herbs and things like that. But I figure about the second week of August, the tomatoes are going to kick in, and boy, we're going to be canning up like mad. So definitely don't forget to hit the like, comment, and subscribe button so that you see when we start those and see what we're going to do with all this wonderful produce that we're going to have. And definitely leave us a comment below, because we love to hear from you. Have a great day.